This cute viral turtle coaster doesn't just sit on your table but also beautifully grabs your coffee cups. So let's make it together. Hey guys, welcome to DIY Crafts. For this project, I am using four-ply 100% cotton yarn and 2.5 mm crochet hook. However, you can use your favorite yarn and its suitable hook size. First, let's begin by making a magic circle. Take the starting tail end in your left hand and make a loop with the working end. Now from the center of the circle, insert your crochet hook and grab the working end. Now adjust the circle and make chain 1. So that's the magic circle. Now in the center we are going to make a double crochet. So yarn over, insert the hook into the center, take the yarn and come out of the center. Now you'll have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and come out of first 2 loops. Yarn over again and come out of the next 2 loops. So that's the first double crochet. So if you want to mark, put a stitch marker on top of the first DC. The chain one which we have done is a dummy stitch, so we are not going to count that as a stitch. So that's the first double crochet. Now we are going to make a total of 11 double stitches in the center. So let's continue to make the second one. Yarn over, insert your hook into the center and bring the loop. Now you'll have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and complete the second double crochet. Yarn over in the center, pull up a loop. Yarn over out of first 2 loops, yarn over again out of second 2 loops. So that's the third double crochet. Now this is the fourth double stitch. And then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's 10, and then the last double stitch, that's the 11th double stitch. Just check the count starting from the stitch marker. You count each and every stitch so that you can make sure you have done the exact count of number of stitches. Now pull the starting tail end to close the magic circle. Now remove the stitch marker, and this is where we have to make a slip stitch. So insert the needle into the stitch where you have take out the stitch marker. Now yarn over, pull the yarn out of the last stitch and also the loop on the hook. So this completes the first row with 11 double crochet stitches. Then chain 1, again we are going to ignore that as a stitch. Now yarn over, insert the hook into the stitch where you have just done the slip stitch, like I mean to say the first stitch, and on top of the stitch make 1 double stitch. Now this is the beginning of your second row. So to mark that, put a stitch marker on top of the first DC. Now yarn over and into the same stitch, I mean the first stitch, insert your hook again and make 1 more double stitch. So which means into the same stitch we have done 2 double stitches, that is a DC increase. Now in the next stitch we are going to make 1 more DC increase. So here we have done the first DC in the second stitch, and into the same stitch we are making another DC. So 2 DCs worked into the same stitch. So this is the first DC increase and that's the second DC increase. Again in the next stitch we are making 1 more DC increase. That is again 2 double crochet stitches in the same stitch. So that's the third increase. Likewise, we'll continue to make increases in each and every stitch until you reach the last stitch. Now here I am making the last increase of the second row, which means the 11th DC increase. Now you will just cross check the number of increases: 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this is how you will check the count after completing each and every row. So here it's the 11 DC increases are done. So remove the stitch marker, insert the hook on top of the first stitch, yarn over and make a slip stitch. This completes the second row with 22 double crochet stitches, and if you see the shape, it will have a little dome shape which gives you that pop-up look for your coaster. Now let's continue and start making the third row. Begin with chain 1. Again in this row also we are going to ignore this chain 1 as a stitch. Now on the top of the first stitch make 1 DC. And then again you can put a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the first row. This helps us to in counting like where we are starting the first stitch, and also helps us where we have to do the slip stitch once we are done with the row. So it's helpful to put a stitch marker. Now in the next stitch we are going to make a increase, that is 2 DCs worked into the same stitch. So this pattern, 1 stitch and 1 increase, we are going to repeat this pattern throughout the row for 11 times, which means the first repetition is already completed and now we are doing the second repetition. That's the first double stitch, and in the next stitch we are making an increase, that is 2 DCs worked into the same stitch. So this completes the second repetition, that's 1 DC and then 1 increase. Again we are going to repeat it. This is the third repetition. So 1 stitch first, and in the next stitch make 1 increase, that is 2 stitches in the same stitch. And now we are going to repeat this pattern throughout the row. So this is the third repetition, and now continue throughout the row until you have completed 11 repetitions. And by the end of the 11th repetition you will get the starting position, that is when you will know that you are following the pattern and count correctly. And also you can check the number of stitches by the end of the row. So by the end of the third row you should get 33 double stitches, and if the count matches then you are following the correct pattern. Now remove the stitch marker, insert the hook on top of the first stitch and then slip stitch, and this closes the third row. Now let's continue and make the fourth row. Begin with chain 1 and then make 1 DC on top of the first stitch. So to mark the beginning of the fourth row we are going to put a stitch marker on top of this first double stitch. So that's the first DC. Now in the next stitch we will make an increase. By now you must have understood what is meant by an increase. So it's making 2 double crochet stitches into the same stitch. So that's an increase, and now in the next stitch make 1 more DC. So the pattern for this row is 1 DC, 1 DC increase and 1 DC. And this set of instructions we are going to repeat for a total of 11 times. So let's continue to make the second repetition. That's 1 DC. Then 1 increase in the next stitch. That's an increase. Now 1 DC in the next stitch. So the pattern 1 DC, 1 increase and 1 DC is now completed, and this completes the second repetition. Now let's do the third repetition. 1 DC and then 1 increase and then 1 DC. This is the third repetition. And now repeat this throughout the row until you complete 11 repetitions or until you reach the starting point. And this completes the fourth row with 44 double stitches. And if you can just check it, like press it in the center and it will just pop it to the outside. Now we have 1 more stitch remaining for the fourth row to complete. Just make that last DC. Now remove the stitch marker, make a slip stitch, and this closes the fourth row. You can leave it as it is, or if you want to add, you can add a little border to this one, and for that I am using a reverse single crochet stitch. Begin with chain 1 and that will be your 5th row. Now identify the stitch, the last stitch in the previous row. Now turn your hook and insert the needle on top of the last stitch in the previous row. Now yarn under, grab the yarn and pull out a loop from that last stitch. Now you will have 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over and draw the yarn through both the loops at a time. So that is called as a reverse single stitch. Now go ahead and make 1 reverse single stitch in each and every stitch. So go back into the previous stitch, insert your hook, yarn under the needle, take the yarn and pull out a loop. Now you will have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and draw the yarn through both the loops. So that's the second single stitch, the reverse single stitch. Now one more single stitch in the next one, and then make one single stitch in the next one, the reverse single stitch in the next one. So likewise we are going to repeat the same thing of making one reverse single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the last row stitches. So just observe it for a couple of times, like 2 to 3 times, until you understand how to do this stitch, and then you can continue. And there are many different ways of making this border. If you want, you can make a chain 1 single stitch and you can continue, or this gives the nice spiral texture on last round, so you can prefer either reverse single stitch or any other stitches for the border. Once the last reverse single stitch is completed, insert your hook on top of the first single stitch and then make a slip stitch. Now chain 1 and trim the excess thread, leaving a 3 to 4 inches of tail end. Now pull out the loop on the hook and fasten off. Make a knot. So this completes the base. Now let's do the finishings for this one, and I'm going to use the tapestry needle. So whenever we are doing the magic ring, it is important to make a knot before you weave in the ends. So for that, I'm just taking the help of a tapestry needle and the starting tail end of the base, secure it with a knot. So this secures the magic center and your work doesn't come or doesn't fall apart. And then weave the tail end into few nearby stitches. And then whatever extra thread we have, we'll just trim that excess thread close to the project. The same way, the closing or the finishing thread also, you just have to put that into the tapestry needle and weave in the end into the nearby stitches, just a 4 to 5 stitches. That's good enough to hold the yarn in place so that it will be nice and secured. You don't have to make another knot, as we have already made a knot as a chain 1. So you don't have to make another knot for the closing tail end. So once both the ends are weaved in completely, you can just trim and snip off the extra threads. So this completes the base of our turtle coaster. Put this aside and let's start making the tail for the tortoise or the turtle. Begin with a slip knot. Now insert your needle into the loop and adjust the loop. Take the working end and start making a foundation chain. Yarn over and pull out a loop, and that's the foundation chain. We are going to make 4 such chains. That's 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now let's start making the first row. Begin with chain 1. So total you'll have chain 5. And now insert your hook into the 4th chain and make 1 single stitch. So insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and draw through both the loops. That's the single stitch. Make 1 single stitch in each and every chain. So in the first row, you'll have 4 single stitches. That's 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now for the second row, begin with chain 1. Turn your project from front to back. Now insert the hook on top of the first stitch and make 1 single stitch. And then continue to make 1 single stitch in all the next 3 stitches also, which means in second row also you will have 4 single crochet stitches, one on top of the each single stitch in your row 1. And this completes your second row. Now for the third row, begin with chain 1. Turn your work, make 1 single stitch on top of the first stitch. Now we are going to make a decrease in the next 2 stitches. So insert and drop a loop from the first stitch. Again insert and drop a loop from the next stitch. Now you have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and draw the yarn out of all the 3 loops at a time. That is a single crochet decrease. So we have combined these 2 stitches by single stitch decrease. Now in the last stitch, make 1 single stitch. So this completes the row with 3 single stitches. chain 1, turn your work and make 1 single stitch on top of each single stitch. So that's 1, this is 2, and there is one more stitch, that's 3 single stitches. Now chain 1, turn your work and make 3 single stitch together. So insert your needle into the first one and drop a loop. Insert your needle in the second stitch, drop a loop. Again insert it into the third stitch and drop a loop. Now you have 4 loops on the hook. Yarn over and draw the yarn out of all the 4 loops at the same time. Chain 1, turn your work and make 1 single stitch on top of the single stitch in the previous row. So this will give you a nice triangular shape of tail for your project. Now chain 1 and trim off the thread. Fasten off and make a knot. Now just like how we have weaved in the tail ends for the base part, here also you are going to take the tapestry needle, insert the tail end into the tapestry needle and then hide the tail end into the nearby stitches in one or couple of rows so that the tail end is nicely weaved in. And this helps us to have a project secured and it doesn't fall apart if you are washing the project frequently. And now trim the excess threads close to the project, and this completes the tail for the project. Now put this aside and let's start making the wings for the project. I mean the legs of the project. So let's begin with the magic circle. We have to make 4 legs. So for this we are going to begin with the magic circle, chain 1. Again we are going to ignore this chain 1 as a stitch. Let's start making the first row. And we are going to have a half double crochet. Begin with yarn over, insert the needle into the center, take the yarn and pull up a loop. Now you have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and draw the yarn throughout of all the 3 loops. If you want, you can put a stitch marker on top of this one, or if you have already understood like how to identify the stitch, then you don't have to put a stitch marker. So that's the second half double stitch. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Once all the 12 half double crochet stitches are completed, pull the starting tail end tightly and close the magic circle. Now identify the first stitch and you put a needle on top of the first stitch to make a slip stitch. So insert the needle, take the yarn and come out of all the loops on the hook. So that's the slip stitch. And this completes the first row with 12 half double crochet stitches. Now for the second row, again begin with chain 1 and we are going to ignore this chain 1 as a stitch. Now on top of the first stitch, make 2 half double crochet stitches in the same stitch. So whenever you are doing 2 half double crochet stitches in the same stitch, it is called as a half double crochet increase. So here I'm just putting a stitch marker so that to avoid any kind of confusion while making a slip stitch. So that's the half double crochet increase in the first stitch. Now in the next stitch, again make another half double crochet increase. That's 2 half double stitches in the same stitch. Now in the next stitch, again make a half double crochet increase. And like this, continue to make half double crochet stitches, increases throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So here I am making the last HDC increase of the second row. You can just check the count by counting the number of stitches. You should get 24 half double stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and then join the row by making a slip stitch. Carefully identify the first and last stitches of the second row. Now this completed the second row. Now we will fold it in such a way that the correct side of the project will be on the outside and wrong side of the project are facing to each other. Now begin with chain 1 for the third row. We are going to fold and join using a slip stitch method. So insert the hook on the first stitch where we have done the slip stitch. Now fold your project and identify the 24th half double stitch, that is the last half double stitch of your second row. Now hold both the sides together, yarn over and make a slip stitch. That means pull out the yarn out of all the loops on the hook at the same time. That is the slip stitch. Again insert the needle into the second half double stitch and the 23rd half double stitch. So those will be facing one next to each other. So it is very easy to identify. Only the first two stitches to identify is the biggest challenge. And once you are done with that, the rest everything will fall in place. One stitch will face the other stitch on the opposite side. So for that, insert into both the stitches at the same time, take the yarn and come out of all the loops at the same time. So that's the slip stitch join. And you can do this really very carefully so that you don't get any other extra threads tangled onto your crochet hook. And once you are halfway through, you can just insert the starting tail end into the project so that you doesn't have to again weave in at the end of the project. So here see the starting tail end is hanging from the center part. So I'm just using the tweezers. If you want, you can just poke it with the help of your fingers also. So just stuff the starting thread, and you might get a doubt that the starting tail end is not secured by making a knot at the center. If you are worried about your project coming apart or falling apart, you can just secure the starting tail end before you start making the slip stitch join on your last row. So once you are done with all the slip stitches on the last row, this one is the 12th slip stitch. So both the sides will be now joined. Gently stretch the stitches so that it will give you a small arch kind of look. Then chain one and then trim the thread. Fasten off, make a knot. Now again, using the tapestry needle, we are going to hide the closing thread into the project. You don't have to weave in into the stitches, just hide it into the center and then trim the excess thread close to the project. Now we will make 4 such pieces and put them aside. Now let's make the main head part for the turtle. Begin with a magic circle, adjust the loop and make chain 1. Now for the first row, we are going to make 6 single stitches in the center. So insert, drop a loop, yarn over and make a single stitch. And if you are a beginner, I would suggest to put a stitch marker on top of the first stitch of each and every row. This helps us to identify the stitch, and also we will know where the row ends and where to start a new row. So put a stitch marker on top of the first stitch of the first row. So that's the second single stitch. 3, 4, 5 and 6. You can just verify the count, and once the 6 stitches are done, pull the starting tail end and close the magic ring. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the second row. Insert the hook on top of the first single stitch or the stitch from which you have removed the stitch marker. So that is how you will identify the stitch with the help of a stitch marker. Now make 1 single stitch, and this is the start of the second row. So here we are putting a stitch marker on top of this stitch. Now insert the needle into the same stitch again and make 1 more single stitch, which means we have done 2 single stitches in the same stitch. So that's a single crochet increase. Now continue to make single stitch increases in each and every stitch throughout the row. So that's the second single stitch increase, and this is the third single stitch increase. Now you will have 3 more stitches. Make increases in all those 3 stitches also. Now by the end of the second row, you will have 12 single stitches. So start counting from the stitch where you have put the stitch marker, and the last stitch will be the 12th stitch. So that is how you will know that you are getting correct number of stitches in the second row or whatever row you are working. Now insert the hook on top of the first stitch and make one single stitch. So here we are going to start making the third row. After making one single stitch, put the stitch marker, and now in the next stitch make one single stitch increase, that is again 2 single stitches in the same stitch. So one stitch and one increase in the next stitch. And now we are going to repeat this pattern for 6 times. So this is the second repetition. One stitch is already completed and this is the increase. So one stitch and one increase, second repetition is done. Continue till the starting, and this completes the third row with 18 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the fourth row. Begin with one single stitch. Put the stitch marker on top of this first stitch to mark the beginning of the fourth row. So that's one single stitch. Now in the next stitch we'll make an increase, that is 2 single stitches in the same stitch. And then in the next stitch make one single stitch. So here the pattern is one stitch, one increase and one stitch. And this pattern we will repeat for 6 times. So let's continue. Here we are doing the second repetition. So start with one single stitch and then one increase in the next stitch and one single stitch in the next stitch. So this is the second repetition, one stitch, increase and one stitch. Now continue this pattern throughout the row until the starting point. Here making the last repetition of the fourth row, and by the end of the fourth row you will have 24 single stitches. You can just check the count after completing each row, like it should match with the pattern stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the fifth row. For the fifth row and the sixth row we are going to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row. So the pattern is simple. Remove the stitch marker, make one single stitch, put the stitch marker back, and then continue making one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row, and we will repeat the same thing for the sixth row as well. And the count for row 5 and row 6 will remain the same, as we are not adding any increases. So in row 5 and 6 you will have 24 and 24 in each rows. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the seventh row. Begin with one single stitch and then put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of the seventh row. Now from here we are going to add a decreases. So unlike the decrease which we have used in the tail, here the decrease is an invisible decrease. So for this, insert the needle into front loops of the next 2 stitches, drop a loop and make a single stitch. That is an invisible decrease. And now make one single stitch in the next stitch. Now the pattern is one stitch, one invisible decrease and one stitch, and we are going to repeat that pattern for total 6 times. So here one stitch and then front loop of the first stitch and front loop of the second stitch, drop a loop and make a single stitch. That's the invisible decrease, and one single stitch in the next stitch. So this is the second repetition, and likewise continue until the starting point. So you'll have a total of 6 repetitions, and by the end of this row you will have 18 single stitches. So this is the end of 7th row. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 8th row. Begin with one single stitch, put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of the 8th row, and then continue to make one single stitch in all the stitches throughout the row. So here we are not again modifying any kind of pattern, we are just continuing to make one single stitch in each and every stitch. Once this row is completed, you will have 18 single stitches. Here I am making the last single stitch of the 8th row. So while making decreases, the stitches tend to get closer and the stitches will become tighter, and it might feel like a little bit difficult for us to make further more decreases, but keep doing the pattern. It's just a matter of practice. If you have enough practice, then this pattern following will also makes it easier. And for row 9, begin with one single stitch, put the stitch marker back on top of the first stitch, and then make one decrease in the next 2 stitches. So insert the needle into front loops of next 2 stitches, drop a loop and make a single stitch. One stitch and one decrease, and repeat this pattern throughout the row, and you'll have it for total 6 times. So one stitch and one decrease. That's the second repetition, and likewise continue until the starting point. Here I am making the last invisible decrease of the 9th row, and by the end of this row we will have 12 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and pull up the loop on the hook. Here we are going to add the stuffing to the project. So take a good amount of fiber fill so that the head will be stuffed completely and it holds the shape firmly. And even after completing the neck part also have to be stuffed with a good amount of fiber fill. Only then when you put a mug on top of your coaster, it will just pop upwards. Now let's continue making the next row. Begin with one single stitch and then put the stitch marker. Now for row 10, we are going to continue to make one single stitch on top of each and every stitch. So we'll just make one single stitch in each and every stitch. And making single stitches after putting the fiber fill might be a little difficult. So the easy thing which we can do for a happy crochet is like put the stuffing into the project, like press the stuffing down with the help of your fingers so that the stuffing doesn't interfere with the stitches, and it will help us to crochet better. Now you see the shape of the head. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 11th row. For 11th row we are going to make decreases. We will have total 6 decreases. So start making first decrease. So here instead of making yarn under, I'm just making yarn over, because the last row of single stitches will give very tight stitches and hands really hurt while making that. So if you wish to have a little easier stitches to make on hand, you can just use yarn over instead of yarn under only for the last couple of rows. So continue to make all the decreases in the last row, and once it is done, from the next row again remove the stitch marker and let's start making the next row. And from the next row we are going to make one single stitch on top of each and every stitch, and we are going to repeat that pattern for the next 3 rows. So row 12 to row 14 we'll just continue to make one single stitch on top of each and every stitch, and this will give a long neck for the turtle. Just continue this pattern. Now once all the 14 rows are completed, this is how the head shape looks like. Now slip stitch into the next stitch, chain 1, and then fasten off by leaving a tail end of 4 to 5 inches, like good enough to sew the opening of the head. Now if you wish, you can just slightly stuff the neck part a little bit so that the coaster shape holds better. Now with the help of a tapestry needle and the tail end, sew the sides or the last row together. As such, the stitches are attached to each other on the last row and there won't be any gaps for the opening. Once it is done, you can just secure it by making a knot into the nearby stitch. And then weave in the tail end into the stuffing, and after that trim the excess thread close to the project. Now this completes the head part. We will attach the eyes at the front of the project. Now take all the body parts at one place, and now let's start attaching all the parts to the base. I'm here using the hot glue gun to attach the parts. However, if you wish to sew the parts together, you have to leave a long tail end of each and every part while completing that particular part of the project. And then you can sew them together, identifying the positions like where to put, and then sew them again using a tapestry needle and the finishing tail end. Now while attaching the legs, identify the alignment or the position or the spacing in between each body parts, and then attach the body parts in its appropriate position. Once the body parts are attached, now let's fix the eyes for the project. So for the eyes, here I'm just using a black color kundan stones. If you want, you can use a safety eyes, or even you can embroider them with a cotton thread. And with that, your cute turtle coasters are now ready to adorn your tables. I hope you all enjoyed watching this tutorial. Do give this pattern a try and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. The written pattern is given in the description. Do check it out. Don't forget to share your work to me on Instagram. See you all in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it and subscribe to DIY Crafts.